And you know what time it is? It's time now for Explain and Verify, and he's back, Samgele Masego, to talk to us about the rand strengthening. Is it because of the GNU, Samgele?
Well, Bongiwe, the rand has strengthened significantly over the past months, moving from being close to 19 rands to the US dollar to just above 17 rands 23 cents. Some commentators have attributed this recent strengthening of the rand to the government of national unity. Is the GNU having an effect on the strong rand? Let's explain and verify this particular point. South Africa's government of national unity has been hailed by the markets and the economists and the NGOs as the panacea for the country's social and economic woes. GNU recently marked its 100th day in office, and the increased perceived political stability brought by the GNU seems to enhance South Africa's appeal to investors. Along with GNU dynamics, interestingly, the rand is strong against the dollar. Bongiwe, at this point in time, let's explain this particular strength of the rand. If you look at the rand-dollar exchange rate, it was 19 rand 83 cents in 1st of June 2023, an all-time high. This was in June the 1st, 2023, where the rand was an all-time high in the rand-dollar exchange at 19 rands 86 cents. Then you go to the 25th of September 2024, the rand-dollar exchange is sitting at 17 rand 23 cents at this point in time. Then you look at some people whom has perceived the real value of the rand, according to economists, is between 14 rands to 15 rands, Bongiwe.
And Samgele, what are we attributing this to? Is it the GNU effect or other domestic and international factors? For example, when you look at electricity, I mean, we haven't had load shedding in quite a while now. And there's also interest rates in the US. Anything?
Well, it's going to be rather interesting, because if you look at reserve banks across the world, they are all increasing their particular inflation rates. You look at South African Reserve Bank has, for instance, dropped South Africa's basis points by about 25 basis points within the interest rates within recent months. You saw I think last week or so, decreasing the interest rates by 25 basis points, which was the first decrease within 4 years. But then you've got the rand manipulation stories that were there. You had ABSA during the time of Mara Ramos apologizing for their alleged involvement in the rand manipulation scandal. But let's listen to the experts on what they have to say on this particular point. We'll speak to Mr. Matthew Matea, who is a wealth manager at Gravitation Wealth Management. Good evening to you, Matthew. Just in essence, explain to our viewers in simple terms, why is the rand strong at this point in time?
Hey, Samgele, good evening. Hey, good evening. You've touched on a lot of good points there, and you know it's multifaceted. There's a lot of factors influencing the rand, and it's always changing. You have to look at local factors and international factors. I think the GNU, we'll speak about that a bit later, but that has had an impact. But we kind of have to take a step back and see what happened last year when we saw inflation so high in the US and around the world. We saw the US increasing their rates, and what happened is we saw massive dollar strength over the last 2 years. And this is not necessarily rand weakness or other currency, it was dollar strength because of the high interest rates. So all currencies around the world weakened against the dollar. What we're seeing now with the start of the rate cutting cycle, now that inflation is coming back within the target bands, is an unwinding of that dollar strength. So as the rates decrease, that dollar strength unwinds, and we're starting to see it's not necessarily an increase in rand strength, but a decrease in the dollar strength. So look at the currencies of the euro against the dollar and the pound against the dollar, or the Australian dollar against the US dollar. All of them are strengthening against the US dollar, and it's this unwind that's been set off by this rate cutting cycle.
If you look at South Africa, can we say that the government of national unity is the main contributor to the strength of the rand that we're currently seeing in South Africa? Or is it the economic initiatives and governance initiatives that government is putting in place in order to try and safeguard the South African economy? You look at the revival of the parastatals, Transnet, PRASA. You look at the revival of the power utility, Eskom, which is the backbone of the South African economy. And at some stage, Eskom was one of the biggest threats to the South African economy.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a part of it. I mean, there's a macro trend that's seeing all currencies are strengthening against the dollar. So that's number one. But is it going to be sustainable? I mean, when the GNU was announced, we saw an immediate strengthening of the rand. We saw the 10-year bond yield in South Africa come down, and that's an indicator of confidence. What it also says is, what the market sees in the GNU because of this is it's creating a more predictable environment. When it says things like they're going to respect the Constitution, maintain the independence of the Reserve Bank, have fiscal restraint. You've also said about Eskom and no load shedding. These are all impact factors that impact the predictability of South Africa as an investment destination. As that investment destination becomes more predictable, we're going to see continued strengthening of the rand. So that's the trend we're seeing, and that's how the market perceives it. So we hope it continues in this way. I mean, it looks like the market thinks we're on the right track.
When you look at the rand, was it significantly undervalued? And if this is true, why would the rand be undervalued?
So the rand has been undervalued for a long time, and I don't think it's South Africa specific. It's more a function of emerging markets. Your emerging market, there's certain characteristics that emerging markets demonstrate that just make it inherently more risky. For example, high unemployment, which we have, that's something that it's something that we're trying to solve, that we need to solve. We can only do that through economic growth. But while it's there, it makes us in any emerging market risky as an investment destination. Eskom was another big thing. I mean, the risk premium I saw, the SABC did a study a couple of years ago. They said there's something like 2 rand that added to the exchange rate because of load shedding. Well, now we've seen load shedding largely disappear. I mean, hopefully it's going to be sustainable. Things like political instability, having a budget deficit is another. These are just characteristics of emerging markets. And this is why all emerging market currencies are going to be undervalued. So it's not South Africa specific. But the next thing is to look at is as these metrics improve, the currency is going to trend, it's going to become less and less undervalued. So if we can improve on these various metrics, which we're hoping the GNU, and they're setting out plans to do so, as we improve on these metrics, we should see a trending towards a more of a fair value for the rand.
In 30 seconds, Matthew, can we contribute the success and the strength of the rand at this point in time squarely and solely to the government of national unity, or it's a myriad of issues?
Yeah, it's always a myriad of issues, and it's always changing. You always have to look at what local factors and what international factors are. So, I mean, an exercise you could do is you could look at, how much has it. Over the last year, I saw the rand is at 19 rand, now it's 17 rand, 15 to the dollar. That's a 10% strengthening. If I look at the pound to dollar, there's been a strengthening of, say, about 5% over the last year. So there's a 5% additional strengthening that the rand had. So maybe that's largely in part a function of the GNU. Largely, the lack of load shedding has also had a big impact. So you always have to look at these various factors impacting the rand. It could disappear, but it definitely has had a positive impact. And I mean, that's what the market is telling us.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. Well, Bongiwe, you had the experts there for themselves saying that we can't squarely attribute the success and the strength of the rand to the government of national unity. It's a myriad of issues balanced with international factors, but also domestic issues like good governance, the strengthening of state institutions, the reliance on the independence of the Reserve Bank, and also upholding of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, but also fixing parastatals like your Eskom, ensure energy security within the country so that productivity and industrialization can take place to revive an entity such as Transnet that is able to transport goods to the harbors for them to be exported out of the country.
And Samgele, it also speaks to another issue that we saw also, causing quite a stir in the lead up to the elections, and that's what Helen Zille had to say about the rand as well.
Well, Bongiwe, in early August, the DA's federal chairperson Helen Zille came under fire after she publicly said she was once phoned by a journalist and the rand plummeted during the negotiations with the ANC. Some viewed this as a suggestion that the rand was weakened in order to achieve negotiation outcomes. Let's look at that particular comment by Helen Zille, who is the federal chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. There is that particular comment. Helen Zille said, "So I told a journalist who wrote in the newspaper the next day, the rand went straight down. I didn't do this to get the rand down. I did it to say to the ANC, don't mess us around. And that goes exactly to some of the comments by political players within the country that the rand is very factional, particularly when you look at the internal dynamics of the ANC. If you'd remember, just on the eve of the announcement of the results of the ANC conference in 2017 in Nasrec, where Cyril Ramaphosa had won the ANC presidency, the rand strengthened. And that would tell you that the market specifically, and one questions, who are the markets? Who do they represent? The rand strengthened. The markets were receptive of Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the ANC and the prospective incoming president of the country. You go back to the weekend special, Mr. Des van Rooyen, the rand plummeted on that particular weekend, on those 2 days. He was the Minister of Finance within the country. You know all the horror stories that came with at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and just referencing the funeral of the late former Minister of Finance, former Minister of Public Enterprises, former Cocktail Minister, and former Governor of the South African, former Commissioner rather, of the South African Revenue Services, that would be Pravin Gordhan, and how Judge Raymond Zondo was referencing that particular weekend and how the markets and how the rand plummeted within the country. And that would just tell you the influence of the political space on the rand on itself and the performance of the rand there, Bongiwe.
And of course we understand the African Transformation Movement, the ATM, writing to the Speaker of the National Assembly, Togo Tediza, calling for, what it calls a parliamentary inquiry into allegations of manipulation. Where are we with the banks that have been accused of manipulating the rand?
Well, that matter is at various stages on its way to the Constitutional Court. 28 international and local banks were accused of, as so-called forex trading cartel, as their currency traders were allegedly involved in manipulating the rand-dollar foreign exchange rate transactions between 2007 going to 2013. Let's see how things stand within this regard with the 28 banks. So 28 international and local banks were accused of this particular manipulation. 3 banks granted leniency for their cooperation. You've got 69.5 million rands. That is Citibank penalty in 2017. So Citibank penalty in 2017 was 69.5 million rands. Then you go to Standard Chartered Bank penalty, which was 47.5 million rands in 2023. 23 banks appealed referral to the Competition Tribunal. So this particular matter will go straight to the apex court in the land, the Constitutional Court, but it also goes with other myriad of issues. You then had the ANC Youth League of the then led of Colin Maina, the then ANC Youth League led by Colin Maina, which accused Standard Bank which accused ABSA, not Standard Bank, accused ABSA of rand manipulation. You also had the EFF at that particular time, if I'm not mistaken, Julius Malema's EFF, then at some particular point when it came to this issue of the rand manipulation, also threatened to go and march to ABSA offices. I know the ANC Youth League in KwaZulu-Natal, led by Tandukolo Sabela, then did go and close some of the branches of ABSA in Durban, particularly on that particular street of West Street in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, Bongiwe. So this particular issue is a hot issue. It will find itself going to the apex court in the land. Some banks are taking this particular issue to the Competition Commission for particular tribunal at this point in time, Bongiwe.
And of course, the increased perceived political stability brought by the GNU will enhance South Africa's appeal as an investment destination, encouraging more foreign visitors and investors. And this indicates that the international community perceives South Africa as less risky to new government. However, while the GNU has clearly had an impact on the rand's strength, it is not as much as some commentators would have the country believe, as a combination of other factors has come into play. And that's how we wrap up this week's edition of Explain and Verify with Samgele Masego. And of course, you can stay tuned to SABC News for more, because definitely next week, Thursday, he promises to have some more riveting conversation.